I thought I was a wife, but I was just a ritual payment.
The humidity in Obalende that evening was thick enough to choke a person. The sky was a bruised purple, and the rain fell in heavy, rhythmic sheets that turned the Lagos dust into a thick, treacherous sludge. I stood under the rusted canopy of a bus stop, clutching my handbag to my chest. Inside was my last 500 naira and a list of job vacancies I had circled in the morning paper. I was 24, an orphan, and the sole provider for my younger brother Samuel. Life had been a series of closed doors until that moment. Then, a black Range Rover pulled up. The windows were tinted so darkly they looked like obsidian. When the glass slid down, the scent of expensive wood and leather hit me, a sharp contrast to the smell of gutter water and wet earth. Tunde looked like a man who had never known a day of struggle. His white senator wear was crisp, and his gold watch caught the dim light of the street lamps. "Sister, you'll catch a fever standing out here," he said. His voice was a rich baritone, soothing and respectful. "I'm heading toward Lekki. Let me give you a lift." I hesitated. Every girl in Lagos is taught to fear the big men in tinted cars, but I looked at my worn-out shoes and thought of the long trek home in the rain. I climbed in. The interior was silent, the chaos of the city muffled by German engineering. Tunde didn't try to touch me or talk about my body. He asked about my family. He listened when I spoke about Samuel's dreams of becoming an engineer. "You have a good heart for me," he whispered, as he dropped me off at my humble apartment in Yaba. "God sees your sacrifice. Perhaps he sent me to be the answer to your prayers." I watched him drive away, feeling a strange mix of hope and unease. I didn't see the way his eyes remained cold even when he smiled. I didn't see him pull a small red-bound notebook from his glove compartment and write my name under a column titled "The Unclaimed." I thought I had met a savior. I didn't know that in the world of the darkness, the most dangerous predators don't growl, they whisper promises of a better life. For the next 6 months, Tunde moved with the precision of a master hunter. He didn't rush me. He groomed my life. He paid off our debts. He moved us from the cramped room in Yaba to a serviced apartment in Surulere. He bought Samuel a laptop for his studies. He became the father Samuel never had and the anchor I desperately needed. But there were moments when the mask slipped. One evening we were at a high-end restaurant on Victoria Island. Tunde's phone rang. He didn't answer it, but the caller kept persisting. He finally stepped away to the balcony. I followed him, intending to tell him our food had arrived. I stopped at the glass door. Tunde's face was contorted in a way I had never seen. He was shaking, his voice a harsh hiss. "I told you I found the one. Her lineage is clean. She has no father to come looking for her. The stars said her heart is pure enough for the renewal. Give me 3 more months." He turned and saw me. In a heartbeat, the monster vanished, replaced by the charming billionaire. Business for me. My partners in Dubai can be so demanding. He took my hand, but his palm was sweating. It was a cold, clammy sweat that made my skin crawl. That night, for the first time, I felt like a lamb being fattened for the slaughter. I looked at the expensive jewelry he had bought me and saw them as golden chains. But whenever I thought of leaving, I looked at Samuel's happy face. The poverty we had come from was a ghost that haunted me more than Tunde's temper. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that big men always had secrets. I didn't realize that Tunde's secret was a blood contract that was nearing its expiration date. The introduction was not held in a hall or a hotel, but in Tunde's family estate in a remote part of the east. The drive took us through thick forests where the trees seemed to lean in, whispering. The mansion was a Gothic nightmare. Stone walls topped with electric wire and gargoyles that seemed to watch our every move. Mama Agnes, Tunde's mother, was waiting on the porch. She was a woman of 60, but her skin was pulled tight over her bones and her eyes were sunken pits of malice. She didn't offer me a hug. Instead, She took a small clay bowl filled with water and a bitter leaf and sprinkled it on my feet before I stepped onto the tiles. Is she the one? Mama Agnes asked Tunde, ignoring me completely. Is she is the one, Mama. Pure, orphan, and loyal, Tunde replied. That night, they gave me a room in the east wing. The walls were decorated with old, fading photographs of women. I counted 3 of them. All were beautiful, and all wore a similar expression of quiet, haunting sadness. I asked the housemaid, a mute girl who scurried through the halls like a frightened mouse, who they were. She pointed to a patch of freshly turned earth in the backyard garden and made a cutting motion across her throat. I couldn't sleep. The house was filled with the sound of chanting, a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from the very foundations. I crept out of my room and followed the sound to the basement stairs. The air grew cold, smelling of stale blood and burnt herbs. Through a crack in the door, I saw Tunde and his mother kneeling before a large obsidian mirror. The moon is rising, Mama Agnes chanted. The price of the marble must be paid in the currency of the soul. Let the girl believe she is a bride until the moment she becomes the bridge. I ran back to my room, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to scream, but I knew if I did, the house would swallow me whole. I realized then that my marriage was not a union of love, but a transaction of life. The morning of the wedding, Tunde came to my room. He was carrying a small velvet box. Inside was a heavy gold anklet, intricately carved with symbols that looked like twisted serpents. This is a family heirloom, he said, his voice dripping with false affection. My mother wore it, his mother wore it. It signifies that you are now part of our bloodline. Once it is on, it must never be taken off, or the protection of the ancestors will leave you. He knelt and snapped it onto my left ankle. The metal was unnaturally cold, and as the clasp clicked shut, I felt a sharp, stinging sensation, as if a needle had pierced my skin. I looked down and saw a tiny drop of blood staining the gold. From that moment, everything changed. I began to have hallucinations. I would see the 3 women from the photograph standing in the corners of my vision. They didn't speak, they just pointed at my ankle. Whenever I tried to walk toward the gate of the mansion, the anklet would become searing hot, burning into my flesh until I collapsed in agony. I was a prisoner, bound by gold and blood. Tunde no longer pretended to love me. He barely spoke to me, spending all his time with the council, a group of elderly men who arrived in expensive cars at midnight and left before dawn. I realized that the anklet was a spiritual tracker, a leash that tied my soul to the house. I was the live deposit for Tunde's next 7 years of wealth. My life was being measured in car parts, real estate, and bank balances. Suspicion turned into a desperate search for proof. One afternoon, Mama Agnes went to the village market and Tunde was away on a business trip to Abuja. I knew this was my only chance. Using a hairpin and the desperation of a dying woman, I picked the lock to Tunde's private study in the East Wing. The room was a library of darkness. There were books bound in what looked like human skin and jars containing things I refused to identify. But on the desk sat a heavy leather-bound ledger. I opened it. My breath hitched. It was a record of sacrifice. 1992. Sister's sight for the first contract. Result: permanent blindness, 50 million naira profit. 2005. First wife's womb for the oil block. Result: hysterectomy, 500 million naira profit. 2018. Second wife's voice for the overseas investment. Result: permanent mutism, 1 billion naira profit. And then the latest entry. 2026, Fumi, target, the heart, purpose, eternal grace renewal and immortality, date, the new moon. Tears of hot rage and terror blurred my vision. I wasn't his wife, I was a commodity. I looked at the photos of the women in the house and realized they weren't ancestors. They were the previous renewals. They were the women who had died or been mutilated so Tunde could wear designer suits and drive Range Rovers. I grabbed the ledger, intending to run, but the door behind me creaked open. Mama Agnes stood there, her face a mask of cold, inhuman jealousy. You were always too curious for me. But it doesn't matter. The anklet has already drank enough of your essence. You're already half dead. Why not make it easy for my son? The realization that my life was a scheduled harvest left me paralyzed. But the human instinct to survive is a stubborn flame. I knew I couldn't fight Tunde and his mother alone. I needed a witness, someone from the outside world who could bring the police, or at least help me break the physical barriers of the mansion. My mind went immediately to Samuel. He was my blood, my little brother, the boy I had skipped meals to feed. I had sacrificed my youth to ensure he had a future. Surely he would save me. I waited until the house was draped in the heavy silence of the afternoon. Mama Agnes was in the backyard tending to those strange red-leaved plants that smelt of iron, and Tunde was reportedly at a boardroom meeting in Victoria Island. I crept into the kitchen and found a discarded burner phone that one of the temporary cleaners had forgotten. My fingers trembled as I dialed Samuel's number. My heart hammered against my ribs, each ringtone feeling like a second closer to my grave. Hello? Samuel, are you there? I whispered, my voice cracked with suppressed tears. Sister, is that you? Why are you calling with this number? Samuel sounded upbeat, his voice full of a newfound confidence that I didn't recognize. Samuel, listen to me very carefully. You have to go to the police, right now. Go to the Panti or Area F station. Tell them Tunde is a ritualistic. He has a ledger, Samuel. It's a record of women he has killed for money. He's going to kill me on the next new moon. Samuel, please, I'm a prisoner in this house. There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end. I expected a gasp, a scream of outrage, or a promise to come with a rescue team. Instead, I heard the sound of a heavy car door closing and the beep of a high-end remote. Sister, Samuel said, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical tone. You need to calm down. Tunde told me you've been having these episodes. He said the stress of the wedding and the move to the big house has made you paranoid. He even sent me photos of the ledger you are talking about. It's just his business accounts for me. You are seeing things that aren't there. No, Samuel, I saw the names. I saw the previous wives. He has a room full of mirrors and human teeth. He's using us. Even if he is, Samuel snapped, his voice suddenly sharp and filled with a terrifying pragmatism. A look at what he has done for us. I am standing in front of a duplex in Lekki Phase 1. The title deeds are in my name. I have a job at his firm that pays me more in a month than our father made in 10 years. Do you know what it's like to not be hungry, to not be looked down on by the world? You are selling my life for a house? I gasped, the betrayal cutting deeper than any ritual knife ever could. I'm securing our future, Samuel replied, and I could almost hear the greed dripping from his words. Tunde said if I keep you calm and help you through this phase, he will settle me with a franchise in Canada. Sister, don't be selfish. You've always looked out for me. Look out for me one last time. Just do what he wants. Maybe it's not as bad as you think. Maybe it's just a small sacrifice for a lifetime of wealth. The line went dead. I stared at the phone as the realization washed over me. Inhumane behavior isn't limited to ritualistics in red robes. It lives in the hearts of those we love most when they are tempted by the glitter of gold. Samuel, my own flesh and blood, had priced my heart and found that a duplex in Lekki Phase 1 was a fair trade. I was truly alone. The gold anklet on my leg felt heavier than ever, pulsing with a dull, rhythmic heat as if it was laughing at my isolation. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Mama Agnes standing by the gate, looking directly at the kitchen. She wasn't surprised. She held a phone of her own and gave me a slow, jagged smile. Tunde hadn't just bought my life. He had bought my escape routes. The betrayal was complete. With Samuel's betrayal, the last pillar of my hope crumbled. I was no longer a guest or even a wife in the eyes of the household staff. I was a marked animal. The next day, Tunde returned. He didn't come to me with anger. He came with a chilling, artificial tenderness. He brought a stylist to the house to prepare me for the New Moon Festival. They dressed me in a white lace that was so thin, it felt like a shroud. "Come," Tunde said, taking my hand. His grip was like a vice, cold and unyielding. "It is time for the pre-shadowing. The mirrors must learn your face before they can keep it." He led me to the basement, to a room I had been too terrified to enter before. This was the chamber of reflections. It was a circular room, and every inch of the walls, floor, and ceiling was covered in mirrors. But these were not normal mirrors. They were dark, ancient glass that seemed to ripple like water. "Stand in the center," Mama Agnes commanded. She stood by the door, holding a bowl of black liquid. As I stood there, the mirrors began to change. I didn't see my reflection. I saw the three women from the ledger. They were standing in the same position I was, but in different stages of decay. One was missing her eyes, the sight Tunde had traded. Another was clutching a phantom womb. The third was moving her lips in a silent scream, her voice sold to the abyss. "You see them," Tunde whispered, standing behind me. His reflection was the only one that looked normal, which made it even more terrifying. "They are the pillars of my empire. Their sacrifice built the floors we walk on. Your sacrifice will build the roof. You will be the highest of them all, Fumi. You will be the eternal grace." Suddenly, the reflections of the dead women began to move toward me. They stepped out of the glass, their cold, transparent hands reaching for my throat. I tried to run, but the floor felt like quicksand. The mirrors began to chant in a language that sounded like dry bones rattling in a box. "The blood is willing! The blood is willing!" The house seemed to roar. I realized the anklet was glowing bright red. It was a beacon, drawing the spirits of the previous victims toward me. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to warn me. One of them, the woman with the sewn-shut mouth, managed to grab my wrist. For a split second, her thoughts entered my mind. I saw a vision of the new moon. I saw that the ritual could only be completed if I stayed silent and accepted the fate. If I defiled the ritual with impure blood or a loud, living scream of defiance, the contract would break. Mama Agnes threw the black liquid on the floor and the visions vanished. I was back in the basement, gasping for air. "She is ready," Mama Agnes said, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying jealousy. "She has seen the glory. Now we wait for the moon to die so our wealth can live." I was led back to my room and locked in. But for the first time, I had a weapon. Not a knife or a gun, but the knowledge that my defiance was the one thing their great one could not digest. I began to plan. If Samuel wouldn't save me and the law couldn't reach me, I would have to turn Tunde's own darkness against him. The days leading up to the new moon were a blur of ritualistic torture disguised as luxury. I was fed strange, bitter herbs mixed with the finest delicacies. I was bathed in water that smelt of copper and old coins. Tunde was no longer hiding his nature. The mask of the billionaire businessman had been discarded for the robes of a high priest in waiting. On the third night before the end, the council arrived. These were the men who ruled Lagos from the shadows. Politicians I had seen on the news, traditional rulers, and business moguls whose names were synonymous with success. They arrived in a fleet of silent black vehicles. As they entered the foyer, the air became heavy with an oppressive, oily energy. I was forced to stand at the top of the grand staircase as they filed into the foyer. Each man looked at me, not as a human being, but as a dividend. They nodded to Tunde, congratulating him on the quality of his latest acquisition. "The skin is flawless. The renewal will be potent. You have done well, Tunde. Most men lose their nerve when it comes to a wife they have lived with for months." "Tunde is my son," Mama Agnes boasted, her hand resting on Tunde's shoulder like a claw. "He knows that women are like flowers. They are meant to be plucked and dried to decorate the house of a great man." That night, they held a banquet. I sat at the head of the table, a queen in a white lace shroud. I watched them eat and drink, discussing the exchange rate and the next election, while beneath the table, the gold anklet burned my skin. They were the architects of a society built on the bones of orphans like me. They had traded their humanity for marble, and tonight they were here to witness the harvest of the heart. I didn't eat. I watched for an opening. I noticed that the council members were all wearing a specific ring, a heavy signet of dark stone. It was the pass that allowed them to enter and exit the mansion's spiritual and physical barriers without harm. I knew then that if I was to escape, I needed one of those rings. While the men were intoxicated by wine and greed in the dining hall, I was ushered back to the east wing by the mute maid. For the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes, pity. As she turned to lock me in, I grabbed her hand. "Help me," I whispered. "You know what happens next. You've seen them do it before." The girl's eyes welled with tears. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a series of deep, jagged scars that formed a pattern. It was a ritualistic branding. She pointed toward the garden, then to the mirrors, and finally to her own throat. She was a survivor of a failed ritual, kept alive only as a slave because her voice had already been harvested. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small dried root. She pressed it into my palm and made a gesture of eating. Her message was clear. This was a purge. If I swallowed it before the ritual, my body would reject the drugs they intended to use to paralyze me. I would be weak and capable of movement when they thought I was a breathing corpse. The girl squeezed my hand and disappeared into the shadows. I looked at the root. It was bitter, ugly, and smelled of the earth. It was my only hope. I swallowed it, feeling a fire spread through my veins. The purity they had cultivated in me for months was being defiled by the bitter root of the common soil. I lay on the bed, feigning sleep, as the low chanting of the council began to shake the floorboards once again. The new moon arrived. The sky was a void, stripped of light. The mansion was illuminated by thousands of black candles that smelt of animal fat. Tunde and Mama Agnes entered my room at midnight. They didn't speak. They lifted me. I pretended to be limp, my muscles heavy with the faked paralysis. They carried me down into the deepest part of the basement, past the mirror room, into a chamber that smelt of the very beginning of time. In the center was a stone slab stained dark with the renewals of the past. Tunde placed me on the slab. He was stripped to a red cloth around his waist. His body was covered in chalk drawings of eyes and mouths. "The hour of the eternal grace is here," the priest of the council announced. The men stood in a circle, their signet rings glowing in the candlelight. "Tunde, son of Agnes, do you offer this heart to the foundations of your wealth?" "I offer it," Tunde said, his voice devoid of any tremor. Mama Agnes stepped forward, handing him a curved silver blade. "Take what is yours, my son. Rule the world for another 7 years." As Tunde raised the knife, I felt the bitter root walking. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of a cornered predator. Tunde leaned over me, his face inches from mine. For a split second, I saw the man I thought I had met in the rain. "Goodbye for me. Thank you for the marble." The knife descended. At the very moment the tip touched my skin above my heart, I didn't remain silent. I didn't stay the willing bridge. I let out a scream so loud and so full of raw, human agony and hatred that the candles flickered and died. At the same time, I lunged upward, my hand grabbing Tunde's throat. The bitter root had induced a violent reaction in my body. I began to vomit a dark, foul-smelling bile directly onto the pure white altar and Tunde's ceremonial chalk. The priest let out a cry of horror. "This sacrifice is defiled! The blood is bitter!" The basement erupted into chaos. The Great One they worshipped did not tolerate an impure offering. The mirror room next door began to shatter, the sound of thousands of glass panes breaking like a barrage of gunfire. The reflections of the previous wives were no longer trapped. The defiled ritual had broken the seals. Tunde fell back, clutching his throat, his skin beginning to blister where my bile had touched him. "What did you do? What did you do?" "I chose life," I hissed, my voice rasping. The council members, those powerful men of Lagos, scrambled like rats. Without a successful ritual, the protection of the mansion was gone. The spirits they had enslaved turned on them. I saw the wheezing elderly man dragged into the mirror room by a transparent, eyeless hand. Mama Agnes tried to grab the curved knife to finish the job herself. "I will not go back to the gutter. I will not be poor again." She lunged at me, but Tunde, in a fit of pure, inhuman self-preservation, pushed his own mother into the path of a falling stone pillar that had been dislodged by the spiritual tremors. He didn't even look back as his mother's legs were crushed. He was looking for his ledger, his gold, his life. "It's gone, Tunde," I screamed, grabbing a heavy brass bowl and swinging it at his head. "The marble is turning to ash." I saw one of the council members drop his signet ring as he fled. I dove for it. The moment my fingers closed around the dark stone, the searing heat of the gold anklet vanished. The ring was the master key. I slid it onto my finger and felt the barriers of the house melt away from me. I ran. I didn't look for Samuel. I didn't look for my belongings. I ran through the basement, through the smoke of the dying candles and the screams of the great men who were being harvested by their own shadows. I burst through the front gates. The security guards, seeing the signet ring on my finger and my white shroud covered in blood and bile, fell to their knees, thinking I was a ghost or a deity. I didn't stop. I ran into the Lekki night, flagging down a passing tanker driver. As we drove away, I looked back. The mansion wasn't burning with fire. It was being consumed by a darkness that looked like a cloud of ink. By the time the sun began to rise, the dream home was a hollow shell of grey stone, looking as if it had been abandoned for a century. The news the next day spoke of a mysterious gas explosion at the residence of a prominent businessman, but there were no bodies. Tunde, Mama Agnes, and the council members had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Samuel came to the small clinic where I was recovering under a false name. He looked pathetic, his designer clothes rumpled, his Lekki duplex keys useless because the bank had seized the properties of the missing Tunde. "Sister, please," he sobbed at my bedside. "I didn't know it was that bad. Tunde told me. He told me." "He told you the price of my life and you accepted the discount," I said, my voice as cold as the east wind. "Get out, Tunde. Go back to the gutter. At least there, the blood on your hands will be your own." I realized that Tunde's immortality was a lie. He didn't live forever. He was just erased. And Samuel's wealth was a vapor. It disappeared the moment the evil that birthed it was defeated. I moved to a small town in the north, far from the whispers of the Atlantic and the greed of the city. I work in a school for orphans, teaching them that the fastest way to wealth is often the shortest way to the grave. The final lesson: jealousy is the blindfold that the devil uses to lead you to the altar. I was jealous of Tunde's marble until I realized it was held together by human marrow. Samuel was jealous of Tunde's status until he realized he was a slave to a ghost. Be careful when you pray for a savior in a G-Wagon. Sometimes God sends the rain to keep you under the bus stop because the car that stops for you isn't going to your destination, it's going to your funeral. Inhuman behavior is not a monster under the bed. It is the person who smiles at you while measuring your heart for a contract. I wear no gold now. I have no marble. But when I breathe, the air is clean, and when I look in the mirror, I see a reflection that is whole, living, and finally free. The end.